Abraham Lincoln is one of the most renowned presidents in American history. Known as the Great Emancipator, and commonly taught to children as Honest Abe, there are few American citizens who do not know of the 16th president. But many Americans fail to realize that Abraham Lincoln, during his presidency, was not nearly as innocent and blindly driven by morals as we make him out to be.
Abraham Lincoln and the Habeas Corpus.
Many Americans treasure Abraham Lincoln and recognize him as his face is on both the penny and the $5 bill. Famous for freeing the slaves and leading the Union to victory during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln cuts a gallant figure today. Although during his time as a politician, Abraham Lincoln was disliked by both Northerners and Southerners alike. Born in Kentucky, President Lincoln was considered Southern by the standards of his time and was a self-educated man, purchasing law textbooks and passing his bar exam with flying colors. This knowledge of law is what enabled Lincoln to stretch and manipulate constitutional law to meet his needs during the Civil War.
Fort Sumter, Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, April 12, 1861, the beginning of the Civil War.
President Lincoln's wartime troubles and subsequent suspension of laws began in 1861 with the crisis at Fort Sumter. With the recent secession of 7 southern states, there was a dispute over who owned Fort Sumter, a small military fort located off the coast of South Carolina. Lincoln referenced this conflict and stated the Union's stance on the situation in his first inaugural address, stating, "The power confided to me will be used to hold, occupy, and possess the property and places belonging to the government." In the weeks following his inauguration, the troops at Fort Sumter were running out of supplies, and Lincoln was under pressure to resolve the issue. Lincoln sent an unarmed supply ship to the fort, alerting the Confederacy of his doing so. Jefferson Davis responded to this action by issuing an order to Major Robert Anderson to surrender the fort under the threat of military action. Anderson refused to surrender, and thus began the war. After a 3-day onslaught by the Confederates, Major Anderson finally surrendered, and the Union lost the first battle of the Civil War.
Immediately following the Union's failure at Fort Sumter, Lincoln faced much criticism from Northern citizens. Complaints ranged from anti-war efforts to accusing Lincoln of instigating the war and claiming that Lincoln's declaration of war was illegal. Yet, this would not be the last time people criticized President Lincoln.
The Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 9. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it.
On May 25, 1861, a Maryland legislator, John Merryman, was arrested for trying to stop Union soldiers from moving from Baltimore to Washington, D.C. He was held by military officials at Fort Henry, where his attorney sought a writ of habeas corpus in an attempt to have a federal court evaluate the charges held against him. President Lincoln consequently suspended the writ of habeas corpus in the state of Maryland, and the general in charge of Merryman's detainment refused to let him go. Although the Constitution allows for the suspension of the habeas corpus in times of rebellion, like the Civil War, it is not within the president's power to do so. Lincoln, in suspending the habeas corpus, allowed for the arrest of those who opposed the Civil War and the North's plights. Lincoln was met with widespread reproach by the general populace, a reaction which would be a detriment to him in the 1864 presidential election.
Within the United States, all persons guilty of any disloyal practice shall be subject to martial law. Second, that the writ of habeas corpus is suspended in respect to all persons arrested. Abraham Lincoln, Proclamation 94, September 24, 1862.
One case involving the suspension of the habeas corpus was that of Clement L. Valentine. Valentine was a Democratic politician from Ohio who verbally attacked Lincoln and his administration. He claimed that Lincoln's administration and the war were destroying the Constitution and civil liberty. Valentine's speeches made him a notorious man, widely disliked in the North. One such speech he gave in the company of General Burnside resulted in his arrest, trial by military court, and banishment from the Union. This outraged fellow Democrats in the North, as Valentine only voiced his dislike for government conduct and did not violate any laws. Using his extensive knowledge of the law and Constitution, Lincoln responded stating that Valentine's exile had been appropriate in lieu of imprisonment as he was not a criminal, and would not be treated as such. Clement Valentine's exile and violation of rights of speech and expression is only one example of the consequences of Abraham Lincoln's suspension of the habeas corpus.
There has been wickedly and traitorously printed and published newspapers printed and published in the city of New York, a false and spurious proclamation which publication is of a treasonable nature. You are therefore hereby commanded forthwith to arrest and imprison the editors, proprietors, and publishers of the aforesaid newspapers. You will also take possession by military force of the printing establishments of the New York World and Journal of Commerce, and prohibit any further publication therefrom. Abraham Lincoln, Executive Order to Major General John A., May 18, 1864.
Abraham Lincoln's suspension of the habeas corpus did not only allow for the arrest of people who opposed the Union, but also allowed for the censorship of the press. Since Lincoln announced the suspension of the habeas corpus, nearly 14,000 political prisoners had been arrested, and over 300 newspapers were shut down by Lincoln's administration. One of the most public shutdowns of a newspaper printing operation was in 1864, when 2 newspapers incorrectly published a forged proclamation. Lincoln saw this as a traitorous act and ordered the immediate imprisonment of the editors of the newspaper and the shutdown of the operation. Although Lincoln's attitude towards the government's censorship changed throughout the course of the Civil War, he was still not opposed to jailing those who caused trouble in the Union. Being the first president to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, Lincoln gained a disagreeable reputation amongst people during his presidency. It was not until after his assassination that people started to focus on all of the positive things he did, including unifying the Union and passing the 13th Amendment. It was his assassination that elevated Lincoln to a Christ-like status and transformed him into the heroic figure that we remember today. But is this status justified by his actions during his presidency? Do Lincoln's positive actions outweigh the negative? If we are able to put a man who violated so many basic rights in the name of a common good in such an elevated position, can we do the same to people today? Where do we draw the line? What rights cannot be violated for the greater good? Regardless of the public opinion, it is important to know both sides of the story to properly understand and interpret history. This is particularly true in respect to the story of Abraham Lincoln and his involvement with the habeas corpus. It is with this knowledge and understanding that we are able to judge for ourselves whether or not Lincoln's actions were integral to the Union's victory in the Civil War.